Hello and welcome to Novelty Show episode 10. We are talking all about character creation today. It's a craft topic. It's a big topic, so we have a lot to get into, but let's start with some introductions. My name is Kat. This is my channel that you're on here, Katie-tastic.
I am Alexa Dunn. I am a traditionally published YA author. My channel is Alexa Dunn, where I talk about writing and traditional publishing.
And my name is Lainey, and my channel name is Ginger Reads Lainey, and I do videos on books and writing, but mostly a lot of writing vlogs.
Awesome. So before we jump into the topic, we do have a quick announcement to make. We've mentioned before that we are going to be starting a podcast, and the first episode has gone up. It's more of an episode 0. It's kind of just an introduction of like who we are and what you can expect for the podcast, but it's live now on iTunes and Google Play, and we're looking into getting it on other podcast apps and stuff like that. So yeah, you can just search Novelty Show podcast. It's just Novelty Show, right?
It comes up under Novelty as well as Novelty Show.
Great.
Yeah, and we're recording the first episode really soon, like the official meaty episode, which was voted on by our patrons. We're doing how the heck do you even write a book? So like book writing 101. So we have this noble aim that our podcast episodes would be like 30 minutes each, but with a topic like that, no lie, it's probably going to be pretty long. So the first one, you'll have it in like a week or so, and it's going to be juicy. So we're so excited about the podcast.
Yeah, and also we want to say thank you to all of our patrons who have supported us thus far in this endeavor. We really appreciate you. And
we're actually blown away.
Yeah,
totally.
You helped us with the startup costs because, maybe we'll do a meta episode someday of how to start a podcast once we know more. But there are more startup costs than one would imagine.
Yeah.
And we're actually starting a new feature, or kind of starting it. I think we did it last time too, where we answer a patron question of the week. And we're going to try to do this in our live shows and our podcasts, assuming you guys hit us with enough questions, which we have one for today and we have another one for our first podcast episode. So we're going to
give us more.
Give us more, yeah. So today's question from our patron, Chen Yan Chang. They ask, my main character in my contemporary YA is a reader. How do I go about including books in my writing? Do I make up titles and authors? Do I use real books, but wouldn't they date my story? And we also had, I think I saw a question on Twitter that was mentioning like pop culture references as well, which kind of is related to this. So.
Well, those are great questions and so good for our topic.
I feel like I've heard answers to that go either way. It kind of just depends on the story you're trying to write.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I've definitely read YA books that have a lot of pop culture references, especially YA contemporary. But it can date it a little bit. It's a very, you can go either way kind of situation. Have you guys ever done like pop culture references in any of your stories?
So in my debut, Brightly Burning, because it's 200 years in the future, I have a lot of pop culture references, like past pop culture references, and my main character and her love interest are readers, because why not? Self-inserts. But also, what else would you do in space? So what I did is, if something was a classic, like now, is a classic now, I figured it was fair game to survive 200 years. And so I named those books by name. I name check a lot of authors. I also do kind of oblique references to some of my favorite books, and it's like an Easter egg so that readers can figure out what the books are. I did this with a couple movies too. And that's actually an example. Depending on your context, you can infer what a pop culture reference is without naming it. And then it's almost like fun for the readers to see if they spot it. And if they don't know what it is, it doesn't matter. They'll think you're a genius who made something up. But then for books that exist more to now, I made Harry Potter a classic. Like, that was my executive decision as an author. Harry Potter is going to be a classic. It's a classic now, but I was like, it's going to survive the apocalypse. That's what I decided. And then I made up some authors. There's one specific author. I decided the future needed like like an Agatha Christie. So I made one up. So I did make up an author and some of their titles.
I've never written a YA contemporary, so I can't say either way. But I think it depends on like what kind of story within that YA contemporary I would write. Like if it was a book celebrating fandom and stuff, I would for sure name drop and put in those pop culture references. But it just kind of depends on what the story would call for, I feel like.
Yeah, and I would say, especially if you're in an early writing stage and you're just working on your own, go for it. Like, do whatever you want. If you are shopping it around to like agents and editors, and some of them are like, we don't want you making pop culture references, or some are all for it, like that can help you determine it. And it will vary from like agent to agent and publishing house to publishing house. For me personally, in my current project, I do a mix of both. Like I have characters reference like some Marvel movies, and they talk about Thor and Loki for a little bit. But I also made up a TV show that I could reference because I wanted to reference some more specific things that I wanted to like make up and create myself and just have it be like a popular show within this world. Yeah, you can go either way or both. There's so much that it depends on.
Yeah, Alexa, did your editor want you to pull back on the references, or did she not care?
I got to do anything I wanted. It was kind of cool. And I did see one review that thought that I overdid it, and I'm like, that's your opinion. I'm cool. Yeah. Maybe I'm full of myself. I was like, I have zero regrets making like a ton of Harry Potter references. There are actually a lot in the book. Zero regrets. Let's talk about character.
And there will be people who will not want pop culture references no matter what.
You can't win, honestly.
Yeah. So just do what you want to do and what feels right to you.
Well, but honestly, also, if you have none, it actually takes away from a sense of place from your book. There really does have to be kind of a fine line. Like, meaning if you have none, your characters don't feel like real teenagers living in the world consuming media, unless that's a part of their character. So that's kind of my thought on it. But yeah.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Okay, so let's jump into our big topic of character creation.
Whew. Okay.
We could start off by each of us talking a little bit about what comes first. Like, at what point in the idea plot development stage do we create characters? Like, do we start with character? Do we start with world? Do we start with plot? What do you guys start with?
Well, for each of my projects, I feel like it's always been different. So with Paraprides, which is my current witch pirate fantasy that I'm working on, it was the two characters that came first. I'm like, I want to write a story about two best friends who are kind of embroiled in like magical warfare. But for Sharp Hollows, my main character was not. She was like the second character I thought of. My first thought of the world. If you watch my channel, I'm very heavily inspired by The Mummy, which is like my favorite movie. So for me, that started with, I want to create something that's kind of like The Mummy. And then I had one character, and then I'm like, well, who could also benefit from this kind of setup? And then I thought of like my main character. So for me, it's either or. It just depends on like what the idea is that comes to my head first.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. It's definitely changed from project to project. I think I usually start with like a basic premise. Like I've never started a project where like the character's voice or like something about them was the first thing that came to mind. It's always been at least a little bit of a premise framing, like with Storyteller about an author who like wakes up in her high fantasy novel and has to navigate that. Like it was that basic premise. But after I had that down, I immediately went into character. I was like, okay, what kind of person is this character? Like they're an author, so they're probably it was a very self-insert character for the record.
We're going to talk more about that.
And then with my current project, I started with a plot twist that I really wanted to play with, but it wasn't until I had the character dynamic between my two main characters, which was kind of just like archetypes in the beginning, like they were each an archetype and they played against each other. That is what really took it off. And then I started developing the characters more. But I did start with a plot twist.
I also similarly start with premise 99% of the time, and I'd be really curious if anyone in the chat uh literally starts with character, because I feel like obviously in your case, Lainey, one of your books you start with character, but I feel like we're all heavy on plot premise, because same, I tend to come up with concepts, high concepts, though some of them are so inherently tied to character that I can't develop the concept without the character at the outset. So my second book, which was shelved, like the concept I wanted to explore was based in a specific main character. I wanted to do like kind of villain origin. So that inherently was like the character kind of came first. But otherwise, my other more recent books, the ones being published, it's always premise, but immediately it's like the most important question you have to ask yourself is who leads this story, whose perspective, through whose perspective am I going to do this? And so it's chicken and egg is kind of the thing. Like, yeah, the character comes so soon after the premise that they're really tied together. Main character, POV character.
Yeah, because I think that the character arc is one of the most important parts of a story, because stories are about change. And so kind of figuring out like who your character is in the beginning and who they are at the end is kind of like what the story is all about. Like the plot is what forces them to go through that change, but it really is about like how this person is changing over the course of the story.
Well, and I think all books should be character-driven books. I know that they're not, but I only like character-driven books. So as a writer, that also makes sense to me. But it blows my mind. Some books aren't character-driven. Isn't that weird? It's a thing. But yeah.
I mean, they are to an extent, though. Like, if it's a decent book, then it is somewhat character-driven. Because a plot, like, I don't know, just going through those motions without having a character attachment makes it feel a little bit hollow. Like, you don't feel as attached to it, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think at least with YA, they're all very heavily character driven, I feel like, because it follows the hero's journey, so to speak. So I feel like that's the genre I read the most is YA. So I feel like a lot of those are character based or character driven.
Yeah, or at the very least, like equally character and plot driven. Like it's a good balance.
Right. Yeah.
But especially in YA, yeah, because it's about you want a character that teens and readers can like really connect to. So the character is very important. It gives them something to like grasp onto and relate to. So what are your guys' initial approaches to character creation? Do you do character profiles? Like, do you fill out those charts? Like, how do you, once you have your premise outline and your character basic, like, how do you really develop that character?
I'm a pantser, man. I can't do that kind of planning. What are you trying to do to me? And actually, in my early days of trying to write novels, I did indeed attempt that, the intense character profiles. And I know some people thrive off of this, and I just can't. I can't come up with everything about a character before I start. I discover who they are as I write the book, especially tertiary characters, so not just my main character. But there is some planning. So personally, I do create like a document in Scrivener. For my primary characters, I usually have to know my main character, my love interest, and usually like the best friend, like kind of the main people in Act 1 who would, a family member, etc., who'd be there, and maybe the antagonist. But I'm only really come up with core things that I need to know, which principally is what does this character want? What do they want? And how does that both complement and conflict with whatever my core hook concept premise is? Like, what's my main conflict? And what are the main stakes? And how can I make it as hard as possible for my main character? And what personality traits, core personality traits do they have that I want to write and explore? I have to kind of nail those down. And in fairness, in my first two, they were retellings. And so some of that character blueprint, it was already written for me, which was really challenging in a lot of ways because Jane Eyre as a core character and Anne Elliot as a core character are so different from me as a person in a lot of ways, and so different from how I kind of, my instinct when I write characters is to make them really snarky and a bit headstrong. And so I had to like dig into what those characters are actually like and how to make them modern teenagers. Both characters, by the way, known in literature for being very passive, which is actually, that was really hard for me. Yeah.
Well, I feel like I've come to learn that my character creation is very much a chaotic mess. I did, the chat's going really fast, but I did see someone talk about the Myers-Briggs thing. I have done that, and I do that because I think it's fun. And I know whatever I do come up with my characters in the first draft, it's going to vastly change, because everything that I want my characters to do and plan out, they tend to do something different. So I never want to like really be set on this kind of character trait, but I do like doing the Myers-Briggs personality test because it gives me an idea of what this character could be. Because especially that website is, I think it's like 16personalities.com. They give like a ton of information. So I can like pull the things that I think this character will be, knowing full well that it's probably going to change. So I feel like I was really heavy on the character profiles and stuff very early on in past books, but like my current books, I don't really dwell on that at all. I just do one test to figure it out so I can gauge how I'm going to write them. But I think
I'm fascinated. No, really. Like, but how do you put yourself so fully in the character's mind to take the test? That's what I want to know.
It's hard because I'm like an INFJ, so I am like.
Same. Kat, what are you?
It switches up a lot. It's like INFJ and INFP. I'm like really between the two. I think.
So it's hard for me to like switch, but it's like it's fun to do it because it's kind of like putting on like an actor kind of thing to like figure it out. But I know that when I write the characters, the first draft is very much like a first date. So I'm like trying to learn the character as I'm writing them. So I know that they're going to change, and I can't be upset about that. So I really don't go further into crafting them before my first draft anymore. Just because I know they're going to do something different and they're going to turn out to be a completely different character than I had planned for them to be. So
yeah, see, I don't do Myers-Briggs, but I do other like similar things. Like I will give my characters zodiac, like I'll figure out what their star sign is. Which is like it's just, I use it as like personality kind of basis.
That's cool.
And also Enneagram. If any of you guys are familiar with the Enneagram out there, that's another like 9 type of personality, like who you are as a core person. And it's based off of like your basic want in life and your basic fear in life.
I can see where that's really good for character, because those are 2 things you should consider when you're crafting characters and writing.
When people bring up the Harry Potter houses, I also do that as well, but usually
I don't do it ahead of time. It's afterwards.
I don't do it ahead. It's like usually I can tell what house they'd be in after like the first like full chapter that I really explore them, and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is definitely going to be a Ravenclaw, which I'm a Ravenclaw, so a lot of my characters tend to be Ravenclaws / Slitherclaws. But that's just because like those are like, that's what I can write because that's what I am, which I guess we could talk about later. But it's very difficult for me to like write Hufflepuff type of characters because that's
weirdly I have no problem with it, and it's not because I'm Hufflepuff. It's because I have no problem writing Hufflepuffs because I wish I were a Hufflepuff, but I'm so far from being one. So I'm like, cinnamon roll character, you are the projection of my best desired self.
That's how I feel about Gryffindors, because like that's my furthest, but I wish I could be.
It's my furthest, but I don't want to be brave. I'm fine.
But I like writing characters who are brave. So I'm like, oh, this character is totally.
Well, it's good for story. And actually, I think the Harry Potter series is a really great example. There's a reason most of JKR's characters that she clearly loves the most are Gryffindors. Gryffindors are great drivers of story because they do things without thinking about them, and they propel the plot forward, and they introduce lots of conflict.
Yeah, see, with my current project, I have 2 main characters. It's a dual point of view, like they're both equally like the main character. And part of the like core function that I wanted them to serve in their dynamic was that they were opposites. So like I intentionally went through and like gave them very opposite qualities. Like one is a griffin puff and the other is a slither claw. And like their star signs are like one is a Leo, like the sun is like their star sign, and one is a Cancer. So the moon is like what controls them and like their personality type. And like one is very like sunny and positive and bubbly, and the other is much more like reserved and kind of moody and angsty. And like I very intentionally went to make them opposites, and that kind of made it a little bit easier in some ways, because I was like, okay, if this character is this, then the other one is the opposite of that.
Interesting. See, with my love interests, I always have to work to find the commonalities. I have to figure out what do they have in common that they actually would like each other. And it's harder than you think, because I also go to the well of conflict and opposites, and you know, because it's great for romance, but then I'm like, wait, what do they actually have in common? And so I do try to develop that sometimes ahead of time, but sometimes I have to figure it out when I'm writing. And part of that came from one of my editor's notes on my second book was, why do they actually like each other? And I was like, I am called out. Thank you. She's like, you have to convince me that they are perfect for each other. Because at that point she was rooting for the other love interest. And I was like, oh, double called out. He's my favorite character, the other love interest. I'm a terrible person. It's great. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about character motivations, what they want. And I also want to contrast this a little bit with what they need, because sometimes a character's want and what they need can be in conflict with each other. And that is very interesting to me. Like one of my characters wants to be left alone, but what they really need to like grow and to like become a better person is to like form connections and to not be left alone. So I think those kind of want and need balances are very interesting. How do you guys work with that?
I have to think about that.
Well,
And it's not like I didn't see this outline. Now you know our secrets. We outline this, only this.
Yeah, that's why I keep looking to the side here. Our outline right now.
It's such a good question, though. I think it forms the core of, it can create external conflict, but that core essential internal conflict for a main character. I don't think a character is interesting unless there is internal conflict. So it's such a good one. But Lainey, I'm going to make you go first.
Well, see, the difficult thing that I struggle with a lot are character wants. And I usually don't really get to the root of the true want until like the second or third draft. I usually have really surface level wants in the beginning. And I'm like, well, this isn't deep enough. I need to go a lot deeper into the character. But that kind of also feeds into how it takes me a while to really get the character. So for me, the want is the most difficult part for me, to find like that very true, deep-seated want that the character needs for their arc of the story. That's like the most difficult for me.
Yeah, because like you might start with a kind of a shallow want, like they want to be a hero or whatever, but then you have to dive really deep into that and figure out why they want that. Like, what is the real drive behind them wanting that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I think I'm like you, Lainey. I don't think I figure it out ahead of time. I think as I write, I also start with very shallow surface level wants, because I mean those are easy for propelling stories. So in my current book, my main character wants to get into college. I mean, that's a very basic, shallow, so to speak. It's not that shallow. It's important, but like it's a very tangible thing. But what does she really want? I'm honestly, I'm almost done with Act 2 and I'm still figuring it out. My last one, my character wanted to save her family. She wanted financial security. What does she really need? The love interest? I don't know. To forgive herself?
What it ends up being in romances, though, is like what they really need is like whatever that other person brings to the dynamic in the relationship.
Yeah. Well, I guess she needed emotional support that she wasn't getting from her family. We're going to go with that. Okay, yeah, I wrote a deep book. Whatever. There's kissing. Yeah. But I think that's so interesting. I think we could actually, I think you can write an entire book and not necessarily know what it is, but you write it anyway. It's there for book clubs to argue about. But I do think it's important.
A lot of times something that you discover in the process. And sometimes it's not until like draft 3 or draft 4 that you're like, oh, this is what's really driving the story. Like you finally like down to that deep root of it. So yeah, you definitely don't need to think of all this stuff and know all this stuff before you start writing. In fact, I would encourage you not to, because you discover so much of it as you're writing it and as you spend more time with the character, that you can't really know how their wants and needs are going to like play with the premise until you're in it doing it.
Yeah, and I think to that end, as much as we're talking about crafting characters, a lot of this will come in revision, or can come in revision. And it's okay if you don't have it all figured out ahead of time. As you can see with us, we're all like, well, Kat, you're the most organized, but I'm
like 5 months into this draft and like in the middle of revision. So like I've been spending time with this. So I feel like I have a better grasp on it.
That's true. I'm definitely like, because I'm drafting right now, I'm still figuring out who the heck people are. And also as I'm writing, I already know I have characters I have to rewrite. Because I figured something out about them in the middle of the draft, and I'm like, oh, they're gonna read like they just had a personality change midway through. Gotta fix that.
Well, yeah, I'm like on the 3rd draft of my Witch Pirate Fantasy, and I actually talked to my critique partner last weekend about it, and we had like this huge breakthrough together, which I think is really important to have critique partners that you really trust. She helped me like open up this like whole side of the character that I knew was there, but I didn't know what it was yet until she's like, well, what about something like this? And I'm like, that's it. Like, now I can write the character like really confidently because I know what like her inner problems are because of that conversation. So
so we have a great question in the chat. How do we create villains? And I think that's worth talking about, because we've certainly touched on main characters and love interests, but antagonists are very important. And I find that they're anchored in your main character. And very often your villain is, I won't say the opposite of your main character, but complementary to your main character in opposite and opposing ways.
Yeah. It's a contrast and a compliment times, because you want something that is very different from your main character, but also a common thread, as kind of showing like your character could become that villain in a different situation kind of thing. Like you want a certain sort of relatability to it, and not just a generic, you pull a villain from wherever that has no like personal meaning to your character.
Yeah.
Trying to think of a good example.
They also need like wants and needs as well. Like you can't not have, So one of my POVs is kind of the villain. So I had to like make sure that I like he was just as fleshed out as the other characters, because he has a want, he has a need, hopefully. I'm getting there. But I also like have him viewing himself as the hero of like his story.
That's essential. I think it's one of my favorite writing tips, actually, to envision this. Well, and I think you can use that for every character, actually, as a thought experiment. Think about how are they perceiving the story if they were the main character. And it can help you. I use that to flesh out not just my villains, but especially my villains, but also even tertiary characters, like friend characters, and especially the love interest. I think about like, if I wrote a companion novella from the point of view of this character, what would it be like? And it helps me to give them layers on the page. And it helps me with reactions. You have to know your characters to have them organically react to things and to speak in a certain way. And so I do consider that, like, I try to go into their psychology essentially. But yeah, frame them as they're the main character of their own story, of their side of the story.
Yeah. I would also suggest looking at villains in media that you really like. Like find a villain from a book or a movie or a TV show that you think is done very well, and try to analyze like what about that villain makes them such a good villain. Because that can like really help like steer you in the right direction of like what you might want to try to aim for. But yeah, I think making sure that they have goals and wants and needs and fears is just, you gotta flesh out them as a character.
Yeah. Well, and also we say villain, but also don't forget that it's antagonist period, and that an antagonist doesn't have to be a villain. explicitly a villain, because I actually think those are some of the most interesting. Like an antagonist can be the mom character who gets in the way. It can be the best friend who's just kind of a dick. It can be a whole manner of things. It can just be a faceless murderer, and you know who the murderer is, but I don't know.
Like a villain is a type of antagonist, but not necessarily every antagonist is a villain.
Yes. We should do a whole episode just on villains.
Yeah, that would be fun. That's a good idea. So let's talk a little bit about fear. Like, how do you determine what your character is afraid of? And not just in a sense of like, not a shallow fear is like they're afraid of spiders or something, but more like they're afraid of dying alone, or they're afraid of dying unfulfilled kind of thing. Like they didn't complete their artwork or something like that. They're underappreciated, more deep fears. How do you work that into your characters?
Well, I think fear drives wants. And I think very often fear is what is going to propel your character onto their journey more often than not. And it can be, I mean, it's not necessarily making it on the page. It's usually in the back of your head or subconscious. Anytime a character chooses to go on a journey, it's because they're afraid of something happening, and this is the only course of action they see to prevent it. And there's like obvious fears and less obvious fears. So in my first book, my character chooses to leave behind her home because she just literally doesn't want to die. Like it's pretty straightforward fear. But you know, in my current one, it's a more surface thing. My main character chooses to investigate a murder because she doesn't want the cops to pin it on her. Like she's afraid of being wrongfully, you know, accused and convicted of something. So, and the base fear of that is loss of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, like most of everything else with the wants and the needs, everything that I feel like I learned with the fears comes with multiple drafts. I can't even think of an example right now of my characters just because I'm like, do I even have fear right now with any of them? I don't know.
Yeah, well, the thing is they play in with your wants and needs so much.
Yeah.
Like one of my characters who like wants to be a hero and like wants to have purpose in life, like their fear is not having purpose and, you know, like living a small life. Like that's what they're afraid of, but they would never articulate that. They're just like, yeah, I want to do good in the world, but they don't acknowledge that like it's a deep-seated fear of like not being enough. That is like kind of what drives them.
And I think that's a common fear for all humans, but especially teenagers. And so I think that a lot of the fears and wants are almost tropes of the genre. So if we're talking about like crafting characters and people looking for practical tips, analyze your favorite books in whatever genre you're writing. We all write YA. And you can potentially use those as jumping off points for your own characters, wanting a place in the world, wanting to leave a mark, wanting to fit in, wanting to figure out who you are. Like these are very common wants that have underlying fears for YA. And then obviously you can do bigger ones when you're doing high concept, like I don't want to go to jail or I don't want to die. But and in fairness, I mentioned those, but there's always an underlying, like more subtle, personalized fear underneath the big ones.
Yeah, for sure. So what about flaws? How do you guys go about giving your characters flaws? Because you don't want perfect characters. They need to have something that they either overcome or they don't overcome it, because both of those are like valid options. So like how do you deal with flaws?
I give all my characters the worst parts of myself. I break it up. But no, so every once in a while I give them someone else's flaws, but usually I'm like, what are like the worst parts of myself and who can I give that to? Because I'm very familiar with those flaws. Honestly, I do that and it helps me work through my own flaws, honestly, but it also makes them feel more real, because I think that a novice writer mistake is to go with really basic flaws in quotation marks. They're clumsy. I'm like, that is Really? Okay. And they're not. I think a lot of writers can be afraid to give their characters deep, real flaws, like making a character judgmental or making a character. I hesitate to call anxiety a flaw. I have it, but anxiety can lead to flaws like paranoia, not trusting anyone, making impulsive decisions based off of knee-jerk emotions. Like those are not outright flaws, but those are flawed things your character can do that can lead to conflict. So I think about the things that I do. Stubbornness, that's a great flaw, actually, but you have to follow through on it. I find that some authors don't.
You have to make it something that they can, even if they don't overcome it completely, they at least tackle it in some way. Like stubbornness isn't really a flaw if they're just like arguing against everything they say. Like you need to make it them stubborn in a more tangible, real way. I don't know how to describe this.
Yeah. Well, flaws are hard. I think that it's hard to talk about because I think they're hard to recognize and work on in ourselves as well. And also to the same end, I think sometimes people pile flaws, a ton of flaws onto single characters, especially antagonists, and then they don't seem real because they're only flaws. And to make them real, you have to give them positive attributes as well. I have a tendency in first drafts only. I always have a mean girl. I'm so sorry, girls. And she's so mean in the first draft. And I know this writing it because there's that character is a conflict machine. They just happen to be girls because I like to surround my female characters with other women. And in my revisions, I have to pile on positive traits. I have to make them a real and whole person and not just a collection of flaws that annoy the shit out of my main character. I think main characters have to have good flaws as well.
And I think tying flaws into strengths is also a good way to do it. Like you want to give them qualities that are both a flaw and a strength. Like one of my characters, their flaw is that they don't really think before doing things, which, if not thinking things through and just acting can obviously lead to some problems, but it also can be a strength in that they're, not afraid to try. They're not afraid to go out there. They're not afraid to take action.
Yep. Lainey?
I mean, you guys kind of covered everything. I mean, I try to also put in my my own personal flaws in some and other things that I want to explore, like irresponsibility. I feel like I'm a pretty responsible person. So like kind of doing the opposite of that is like difficult for me.
That's fun. It is fun crafting characters who are so different from you. That you're like, how do you walk in the world?
Yeah, or like someone who's like, really trusting. And I'm like, I can see, I'm like, why would you do this? Because I would be like, nope. But then like this character needs to like kind of have that mistake of trusting someone they probably shouldn't. But yeah, I feel like, I just, they're difficult. It's all difficult. They like the wants, the needs, fears, flaws. They all make the character, but they're so difficult to like assign characters these certain flaws. So, or, traits, period.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to like untangle. And again, most of them are so related to one another. Like you can't like wants and flaws and fears and needs, like none of them should really be independent. Like they should all relate in multiple ways, kind of. Okay, let's talk a little bit about backstory. How do you guys figure out a character's backstory and how do you work that into a draft or your manuscript when it happened in the past? Like how relevant is it?
I love backstory.
We could do a whole episode on backstory and like working that in because that's a whole big topic.
Yeah, well, and family histories. I love family histories. Well, and so that is one of the places I start. It's one of my favorite tips for developing characters, honestly, if you want to like fully Ravenclaw this. I do this mostly for principal characters, but it depends. I love figuring out who people's parents are. And by figuring out who their parents are, I figure out how they would have been raised and how that might impact their psychology. and kind of how they approach the world. And sometimes I go even further back than parents, but I particularly love parents because I'm like, everyone's parents either messes them up or, well, everyone's parents messes them up a little bit. But also obviously hopefully builds them up and gives them wonderful things about themselves. But I think it can really give you a good jumping off point. Like, is this the character who's secure in their family? Have they grown up with unconditional love? Are they very sure of themselves? Or do they have crappy parents who maybe, you know, threw them out into the world and they are a bully because of that? That sounds really simplistic. But the point is I love to analyze the parents and how they mess up their kids.
That's interesting because I wouldn't have like said that immediately, but now that I think about it, when I was looking at my characters and I was trying to figure out like how did they become the way they are, like how did they end up as these people, I did go into family. I was like, it's their family, it's their family life, it's things that happened in the past when they were growing up, like a couple of specific key moments that like shifted their worldview that happened when they were younger because of their parents.
Well, it's like hugs or hits. Not literally, though sometimes, but did they have a single parent? Did they have two parents? Were those two parents happy? Were they raised by their grandmother? I love all sorts of questions like this and kind of,
how close are they to family?
Do they have siblings? That's another really good one.
I did that a lot with my other work in progress. I did like really extensive family histories, family trees and everything. So I was like so involved with the family aspect. But for like this current one, I'm like not as involved with the family backstory. Like one of my characters, she's never met her parents. And my critique partner said to me like the other day, she's like, have you figured out what her parents are like? And I'm like, not yet.
You'll get there eventually. Well, because you can work backwards. We always start with the main character, which isn't actually how humans actually are. It doesn't, you're not born fully formed. It does start with parents, but you can always create parents who match your character. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you can work backwards from something you already know. Like if a character is very suspicious and paranoid and not trusting, like let's work backwards. Let's see what happened in their family life to make them that way. Mm-hmm. Like maybe they're not close with their parents. You know, they spent one too many afternoons like waiting at the school for their dad to come pick them up and like just waiting there after everyone else had been picked up. And so they learned like not to trust people because they didn't have like a trust system in their family kind of situation.
I really like writing characters with other characters, like history with other characters. I like those kind of tropes and stuff, especially with relationships. So sometimes what I'll do is like I'll write scenes that no one else will see but me, but it's just like helping me build the character's relationship. Definitely, if they're like, a relationship with baggage, and like other key moments in like a character's life, just so that I can like kind of live through it with my characters so that like I know how to write them better in like the actual book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually leads us nicely into another mini topic that we have here of relationships. So let's talk about relationships, not just backstory relationships, but present relationships and how those dynamics can affect the character and their arc in the story.
But one that I think sometimes gets overlooked, it depends on the book, but I think friendships are really important. Like everyone should have friends, I hope. But I think it can get, at least in our corner of the universe, in YA, especially if it's YA with romance, often the friendships can be really overlooked or there's only one friendship, which partly we do for economics. It's hard to have a ton of friend characters, but I try to at least give them two. Let the poor human being have more than one friend. But I think that how they relate to other people, what they get from other people, what those characters kind of do for them can be really important. I love friend characters because they complement those flaws, and they can be part of the mechanism that helps with character growth. I love having the supportive female friend. That's one of my favorite ones to write, or a mentor figure.
Yeah, I think one thing that is kind of important, which is a kind of a writing tip that I learned from D&D, which is to make all of the characters have independent relationships, not necessarily with the main character. Like if the main character has two friends, like it's not just about the main character's relationship with those two friends. Those two friends also have a relationship, and you don't have to necessarily like really get into that and explore it on page, but you should at least be aware of it. Like all your characters aren't just there to react with the main character. Like you want to make sure they have relationships with everyone else they interact with.
That's really good. Yeah. And just to harp on my parents, I also do genuine, like I think relationships with parents in YA, very important. Partly because we have to get the parents out of the way. So I think it's important to know, like, how present are they? What is that relationship like? But also just because I think it's an important trope in YA for a reason, because so much of the YA coming of age is like dealing with our parents, like gaining independence, figuring out who we are apart from our parents. So that's another relationship that I think is important, even when the parents aren't present, like in the story. I think a lot of us always bear in the back of our mind, like, what would my mother say? Or screw them, I'm doing it anyway. Or the fear of becoming your parent. That's another good one, which mostly hits when you're a little older. But even at 17, I knew I was becoming my mother. So, Lainey.
Oh,
You can talk about romantic relationships, maybe.
Oh, okay. So I love doing romantic relationships. Like that's like my favorite part of like crafting the characters, which we can also like I guess talk about when like relationships you have like I feel like I have set plans. I'm like, okay, this character and this character are going to get together. And then what I learn as I'm writing is that those two characters do not go together at all. And it completely messes up like the whole plot of what I was trying to like do. Thankfully, like my one ship I guess I can say, in my current work in progress did remain the same. And like that's like the only time it's ever remained the same out of all my other books. But I do find out like one of the other main character, she had this friends with benefits type of character. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be them throughout the book. And then I realized about halfway through that she was definitely bisexual. And the other female character that they kind of meet, I'm like, wow, they have so much chemistry. So I had to like rework this whole like romantic plot because I'm like, well, this guy doesn't work anymore because she's definitely going to go for this girl. So I like, even though it really messes up your story, like what you had planned, the outline part of me is just like, God damn it. On the other side,
Welcome to my world.
I'm like, this is like what I love about writing is like discovering these new things that I wouldn't have discovered if I would have tried to plan that. So I really love romantic relationships. The friendship though is sometimes really difficult for me to write. And it makes me sound like I have no friends, but I do. But the female or the friendship, the best friend relationship that I have right now with Pair of Prides, my pirate fantasy, is like really difficult for me to like layer. It's really hard to like put in like I don't want to say flaws within the friendship, and animosity seems too troubling, but like I don't even know how to like explain it, but like when
something.
yeah, like
There's a natural push and pull in the best and most layered of friendships, especially with women. Well, not just with women, with people. We always have opposing agendas in the sense that all human beings are inherently selfish. So I know what you mean. Like there has to be like you can't always perfectly get along,
Right.
and the friend isn't some magical support object. Like they have their own feelings and perspectives, and so I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And that's hard to get on the page in a nuanced way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also a similar way. Like I have more trouble writing friendships than romantic relationships because I just want to push the characters together romantically. But yeah, let's actually jump a little bit around on the outline here, kind of based on what you were just talking about, Lainey, about recasting characters or drastically changing a character something from that you hadn't planned. Because I've had to do this. I feel like both of you have had to do this as well, where it just what you started off intending to do ended up not quite working. Something else popped up along the way, and you're like, oh crap, this is how it actually has to be.
Yeah, this usually happens with my antagonists. I'll start out with one person in mind, and then in developing their backstory and making them the hero of their own story, I fall in love with them in some measure. And either they can't be the villain anymore, I've had to change it, or I have to really pivot a lot of the other stuff. So yeah, they're the antagonist, but they're kind of my flawed cinnamon roll. And so I have to, it adds richness in a good way, but more often than not, I've changed my antagonist because I'm like, I can't do this to you. I love you. Yeah, I've done that more than once. Especially, it's happened twice now, actually. So both Jane Eyre and Persuasion have third act douchebags, basically. They both have that trope, which I think was just very common in literature at the time. It was always that guy who wanted to marry a woman for very pragmatic or kind of underhanded reasons. Like Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte did the same thing. And because I like to give my female characters agency, I changed both of those characters, but also fell in love with them, so they became my favorite characters. And so it changed the flavor of the third act male antagonists, where they're not antagonists anymore. Whoops. Respecting agency ruins everything. But yes, I've not done that twice. Yeah.
I don't think I've drastically changed a main character, because maybe I just feel like they're always evolving. So they just change for the better, or they're just becoming more of their person. But the most I've done is recasting love interests. That's like where it happens for me. My biggest changes come from the love interests in the books.
Can you be a little specific with an example? Like, how drastic of a change was it?
Yeah, because I've never changed mine. Like, ride or die.
For my very, very first book, which was like a Red Riding Hood retelling, I wanted her to be with the prince. And then as I was discovering it, her best friend was the one that she had the most chemistry with. So I had to go back and make all the instances where it was like a romantic interest with the prince were turned into a friendship. So like I had like take out like massive scenes, like hookup scenes and stuff. I'm like, well, this don't work anymore if they're going to be best friends. So that was one. And then in one of my other books, he, again, relationship with history, which is like my favorite trope. That one I expanded a lot more. And he was kind of two-dimensional, I guess, kind of surface level in the beginning drafts. So I'm like, if he's going to be kind of becoming like this major X, so to speak, in her life, I need to make him a lot more human and more 3D. And he's now like the secondary main character in that book, because I had to like completely rework his entire character, make him less of a douchebag, but still kind of a douchebag, and give him redeemable qualities so that even though you kind of hate him, you're kind of like, well, but he has like all these really great qualities too. So
recasting characters is my biggest problem with one of my long-running work of progress, Storyteller. So Storyteller, I had to recast the love interest twice. I started off with an original love interest, and he was just kind of boring. So I was like, okay, we're going to change you completely. You're going to be a whole other character. Like, instead of being related to one character, you're now related to a completely different character from the other side of like factions, I guess, were kind of the situation. You now have a completely different backstory, completely different relationships with everyone, and a completely different personality. That guy didn't work out either. And it was realizing that, and that like he just wasn't working, and that I would have to recast him again, that made me take a break from Storyteller and start working on my current project. Because I realized, like, oh my God, I have to recast him again, I can't do this right now. I need a distraction. And I started writing something else. But when I go back to storyteller, I will be coming up with a new character to be the love interest, because like I had my main character's journey down. Like I have my premise, which is set, and like my external plot. She has to make her way through the story and like guide her characters through the story to get to the end. And her internal struggle of like, she wants to just like guide them covertly and not get too close to them, and she's not really into taking chances and stuff, and she has to actually like learn to live. But like figuring out her love interest and how he would compliment her and like push her in good ways, and it's just I had to figure out a whole new dynamic. So that's what's up with that.
I've just never done that. Ooh, echo. Kat, is that on your end?
I might have to refresh. Yeah.
Well, technical difficulties. I not so much recasting, but I do want to speak about. I have completely revised a character arc before, and that is legit, because essentially when it comes to tertiary characters, so not the POV character, the one whose head you're in, who that character is all about their reactions. It's how they interact with the main character, and you can definitely change the way that a character behaves and comes across on the page, and I have had to do that. So in my second book, by rewriting the romance arc 3 times, yeah, I did, that ended up kind of morphing the love interest. Like he was meaner in one draft than he ended up in the final draft, but also my main character's sister, I had to and her primary social antagonist, I had to rewrite both of them in one like major rewrite, where it was literally just how they reacted to things, and kind of the things that came out of their mouth changed how those characters were perceived on the page. Part of that was making them more well-rounded. But that is something that you can do, but that's definitely it's a revision problem.
You don't have an echo anymore, do we?
No.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about character voice. Voice is a whole other topic. We could do a whole episode on voice.
Every episode we come up with 5 more episodes.
It's a good thing we're doing a podcast now, so we can like really cover everything. So let's just basics of voice. Like, how do you determine what a character's voice is going to be, or does it just kind of happen?
Yeah. I'm just thinking about how
echo.
Is there an echo?
Yeah.
Is that on me? Do you think that's me?
I don't hear. It's gone now.
Okay. Well, voice. Okay, so I'm right now struggling with voice because 2 of my main characters out of the 3 that I have, because I have a multi-POV story, they sound too similar. So it's really difficult trying to find the exact, nuances of a character's voice to make them different enough where they don't sound the same.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I'm like, well, I did this other character is like so different from the other ones. Why can't I do that with these others too? And like that's like my current frustrations right now with revision. It's hard, but I'm also right now, yeah. Is it echoing again? No, okay.
It was.
Okay, but like,
occasionally there'll be like a little blip of an echo, but then it goes away. So like,
okay, I'm just gonna power through. Yeah. So the other book that I'm drafting is first person, and I'm finding it is so much easier for me to write, not voicey, but just like a very distinct kind of voice when I'm writing in first person, which is this is the first time I've written in first person, a book in first person, but I'm like enjoying it. But I also, third person is like my comfort zone.
Yeah. We should just do a whole episode on POV, because there's pros and cons to both. Like voice is a little easier in first person, single point of view. If you do dual or multi in first, you are creating a whole other challenge for yourself. But there are other ways that first person is hard. And voice is, so some practical things. Sentence cadence is a way to create distinct voice. And generally, human beings talk in different ways, so that shouldn't be too hard. Many of us talk in rambling roll-on sentences, and others are pretty concise and to the point, so you can use that. Humor, I think, is a really great way to create distinctive voice, but the catch is everyone can't be funny. I think we've all read that book where you're like, every single character has the same snark, and that snark is the author. That's annoying. It's hard, but I try to limit it to one, maybe two characters who are wisecracking, and maybe have them crack wise in different ways, different types of humor, which isn't easy, but doable. What other ways do you guys do voice? Those are two of my favorites, but that's mostly reactionary because I write in single POV. So the getting different voice from other characters is about how they respond usually to my characters.
Yeah, it's something that I'm struggling with a little bit, like working out with this current project, especially because it's a dual point of view. And like I've kind of gently roasted some books that I've read in the past that had dual point of view, and like I couldn't tell the characters apart. So
it's
like,
real.
a very big focus of mine. I'm like, well, shit, like I kind of critiqued that one book for like not doing a great job of dual point of view, and now I'm doing it, so like I better do it right, or it's like, what a hypocrite. But yeah, I like the giving them different types of humor. Like if a character has a joke, I want it to feel like only that character could tell that joke. Like, especially if it's like a snappy, wisecracky line, like I want you to be able to read that and not even have a dialogue tag and know what character would say that, because it's just so much a part of their personality, which is so difficult. And I don't know how to like describe or like give advice on how to do that. It's just something that you got to work on and get feedback from beta readers, critique partners, and just read a lot, write a lot, keep working on it.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm like trying to do, and I have to be careful about this, is that like I'm trying to give characters comp titles of different characters, which I think is sometimes helping me, but I have to be careful not to mimic that character completely, because
there are character tropes, so yeah, not everyone can be Casbrecker. I don't know.
Right.
Although if you read current YA,
everyone is Casbrecker.
Was that shade? But or a Jace type is also another one that you see a lot. But something I also think is important, to not necessarily think of it explicitly as voice, but perspective. Because especially if you're doing multi-POV, I have written multi-POV, every person is going to observe different things because different things matter to different people and characters. So another way to do it is to change what is important in the narration, especially first person, but third person as well. Like, what do they actually notice? That's another way to differentiate. So one character is maybe hyper analytical and analyzes and looks at everything, but the other character, you could have them gloss over certain details. But again, also you can use sentence cadence. Like one person's internal monologue is a lot shorter and snappier, and the other one is maybe more lyrical. Are ways to approach that, but it's exactly, Kat. There are so many books where you cannot tell them apart, and you're so mad because you're like, who is this? Yeah. So whatever, especially in first person, whatever the internal monologue is, the style, you should make it different for the different characters. Like one easy cheat I find is I tend to write first person characters who have a lot of internal asides, but if I were doing multi, I would limit that to only one character. So
yeah, I think one thing, like your character's perspective, like their worldview, what they want, what they fear, all that stuff about who they are as a person should kind of color everything that they do and everything that they do. Like one thing that I've heard from Brandon Sanderson, he's mentioned this in a couple of his like online, or not online classes, because he teaches like in real life, but then people film them and upload them online and anyone can watch them. And his podcast as well. Like if there's a glass of water on the table, a character who comes from a culture where like water is very rare and they don't have like clean water and fresh water, they're gonna view that glass of water of like, they're just leaving that water out unattended, like no one's guarding it, like what's up with that? Whereas someone else is just like, it's half a glass of water, like I don't care about it, kind of thing. So just like coloring their perspective by culture and like how they've raised and what they want and what they're used to is a really important thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about appearance, character appearance. How do we work that into our stories and how do we make that matter?
Kat, they look into the mirror, obviously.
Yeah. When I wake up in the morning and do my morning routine, I stare into the mirror, my brown hair and blue eyes.
Yeah.
I try not to overload it in
Yeah.
the beginning. You have to sprinkle it in like the first few chapters, and then kind of keep bringing it up, but not to the point where it's like, yeah, we get it. They have blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously the easiest is other characters, not your POV character. And every time you introduce a new character, it's like your one shot. The reader will forgive you for having like a descriptive couple of sentences the first time you meet a character. But after that, you got to be real careful. And so I say that when you use up that shot, make that description good, make it specific, but not like he had brown hair and blue eyes. Like think about how you describe it. Use your main POV character to kind of color that, like personality and character specific ways that they would analyze what a character would look like. And then for your main character, you can have other people say things about what they look like, but also honestly, main characters are self-inserts. You don't have to go overboard in describing what they look like. The answer is this is hard. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop rambling.
I think one author who does this very well is J.K. Rowling. And just take a look at some, like if you reread one of the Harry Potter books, like with this lens in mind, like paying attention to character descriptions, you will notice, like if you hear a character that has like a hook nose and black slicked hair, that's Snape. Like, you know, that's Snape. Or a character with like big glasses and a lot of hair, like, you know, that's Trelawney. Like characters.
Well, so specificity.
Yeah.
Details. And so, yeah, I guess to that end, you can think about hair, not just color, but condition, accessories, glasses, height, body size, but be careful, no fat shaming. I will come for you. Oh God, one of my biggest pet peeves is the cheat that a lot of writers use that I hate, where they use really gross vocabulary to describe a large character. Hate it. Thanks. Meaning a lot of words to describe larger characters are inherently fat phobic. Fun fact. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
Make all your villains fat, then that is like a negative about them. Yeah,
or ugly, or disabled, bad. Don't give all your
a lot with acne, like a character.
Yes,
like disgusting. And as someone who has had acne for like 31 years, like I hate that.
Well, and you can consider things like makeup. You know, if it's a female character or a guy with eyeliner, thumbs up. And also what the physical attributes say about that person. So meaning like in my current book, because it's YA contemporary, I have my main character remark what makeup products a character is using. Can you tell I'm really into makeup? But that actually says a lot about their character, because my character is able to say, well, she's wearing Becca highlighter and Fenty foundation. I'm like, yeah, because she's rich. So that's well, and they're on trend. So like whenever you're describing a character, think about the specificity you're using and what it says about the character. Yeah, it's hard though. I honestly think it's hard. You're right. J.K. Rowling's a master, but again, also third person. And so she can get away with certain things.
Yeah, for sure.
That it is not to say that first person's harder, but it is in some ways. First person is in many ways a more generic POV to write in, which is what I write in. Kill me. It's fine. Not intentionally. Oh, we will do a whole episode on point of view. Tense.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about self-inserts.
Oh, yeah.
something that most new writers do a lot. I mean, some established writers as well. But I know for sure the first book that I ever wrote, the main character was just a self-insert, was me.
Same. Yeah. Lainey, was your first main character self-insert?
I mean, she did have red hair. That's the thing, like, kind of not related, but that's something I really like, I'm aware of. Maybe it's just because red hair is really distinctive, but like I want to give my characters red hair because I'm like, I like that color, obviously, because that's what, but I don't want people to think like, oh, she's just putting herself in the story, because I feel like red's too distinctive.
It's mostly just that so few people in real life have it. You're lucky. I hate you. Yet so many YA heroines have red hair. It's just a statistical anomaly.
And
I can't do that.
And green eyes. But same thing. I have green eyes, and so I really want to give character green eyes.
It's hilarious because like 3% of the population has green eyes or something like that, but like 97% of YA characters have green eyes.
I love my green eyes. They're great. But no, I have to be careful. Like I instinctively want to give people green eyes because also I think that it's easier to describe the traits we have, which I think is another reason that we do that. So I think it's natural for new writers to write 99% self-inserts in their first book. And it's fine. You have my approval if you need it. Because I think it's a natural part of the process. What, of course, gets really awkward is if those first books are published. That has happened sometimes. And then, like, as a reader, you're, like, looking at it and you're like, that's the author? And sometimes it works out, but I'm still like, oof, ouch.
I think I still write self-insert characters. I've just gotten much better at doing it. And, like, I'll include my own traits in a more subtle way. Like, they won't look like me, but they are still sides of me.
Yeah.
Like my two characters in my current work in progress, like they're opposites of each other, but they're both me. They're both different sides of me.
And I think that's natural in writing. All characters, inevitably, whether we like it or not, will have aspects of ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
There's like one character that I was writing and I'm like, why is she so difficult for me to like really get into her head and really explore and stuff? And then it was like by the third or fourth draft where I realized this character, despite being the complete opposite of me, is actually me. And that's why I'm like having such a difficult time writing her, because she's too much like me and I don't want to explore those aspects of myself that I don't like.
Yeah.
And it's and it was hard for me to like move forward with that character. But also another one of my main characters, she's everything I want to be in a person. That's like in a weird kind of self-insert, because like I still wish that I was her.
Yeah.
But she's not me, but she's easier to write because she's everything that I wish I could do and be. So,
and I think that great characters come from that, actually. Writing what you want to be, writing what you're afraid you are. I think those characters are interesting. And I don't think writers should hold themselves back from that. But specific to like self-insert Mary Sue territory, I think the key thing, and again, do it on your first book, like we all do it. I did it. It's the percentage of similarities where you have to just watch yourself, because essentially self-inserts are considered juvenile. And in fairness, they usually are, because usually when you write a total self-insert, they don't have real flaws. And you're afraid to do things to them. And the story can come across as wish fulfillment. And again, I think we all deserve a wish fulfillment book, total wish fulfillment. But the key is like, okay, so they have your anxiety, fine. They have, they see high school the way you saw high school, fine. But do they also have your exact hair color and your exact eye color and all of your hobbies and all of your strengths, like, you know, talents? Like, that's when you have to start thinking, oh, maybe this person shouldn't literally be me. And it's making tweaks.
The biggest thing for that, the biggest motivation to change that for me would just be like my own sanity, because like once people start critiquing that character,
yeah.
Like, oh,
that's the danger of self-inserts, because if it does get out there, you're doubly as vulnerable.
Yeah, like any review like critiquing the character really just roasting.
It's you.
And I'm like, oh, please stop.
Right? Which is still a danger if you put major parts of yourself in characters, but I
absolutely still gonna be that way no matter what I write, because like my characters are me.
Yeah,
so
but that's just being a writer. I think we're all vulnerable because we all pour large parts of ourselves into the characters. But yeah, I think that it's like, don't make them 100% you. But also just because that's very novice. It's very novice to just write exactly who you are, because part of writing characters and stories is creation. It should be fiction. There should be fiction in it. Otherwise, just write a memoir. But don't write a memoir.
Okay, we're a little bit over time, but there is one last note on here. Character soup.
Called out.
I'm not super familiar with this. So.
Oh my God. Welcome to nightmares.
So I like large cast of characters,
Mm.
but most likely I'll need to take away at least 5 or 6 of them throughout the drafts. And it's very difficult for me because I'm like, of course, I know all these characters. I know all their, their history and whatever. But then a critique partner, or in my case, my mentor, was like, you got too many characters. So you need to either combine wants of all these characters, what kind of purpose they serve for the main story, or you're going to have to cut some. So I've like cut about 5 characters so far in this draft alone. But it wasn't like hard. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I could get rid of that one, and I could get rid of this one too. Even though it was like kind of hard, I'm like, oh, but I liked that character. But you don't want to confuse the reader. And I feel like, yeah, I do have a lot of named characters, and that's just going to get too confusing. Plus, the reader's not going to feel connected to any of them because there's just so many.
And you don't get enough screen time with them. No, I'm always guilty of character soup. My first drafts always have too many. This is partly because of pantsing, though you're an outliner and you still ended up with too many characters. So we have so much in common. But it's because as I draft, I'm like, oh, I need someone to do X. So I'll just create someone in the moment. And then I get to the end and I'm like, oh, that character from the first 3 chapters literally disappears. And then I end up combining. Same thing. Like I tend to combine rather than just flat out cut. But I think a lot of writers do this where it's just like, I love them all. They're all my children. I'm like, and some of them need to die.
Yeah, I also write journey type of stories. So I'm like big into like, let's have a lot of characters that'll go on this journey all together.
Yeah.
And then that just like gets too confusing. Even when I'm like writing like big dialogue scenes, I'm like, where's this character at? They haven't spoken yet in like the past couple chapters. So I should mention them, where they're at, what they're doing, give them a line or something. But then it's hard, especially in my other book, it was really hard for me to cut down on a lot of the characters that go on the journey. Cause I'm like, but I love them. But it was a lot easier in this, in my current work in progress, to cut characters.
Yeah. This is interesting because I've definitely combined characters before. That's actually what happened with one of my major storyteller recast. I was just like, oh, there's 2 characters and they just need to be one person, and that's the love interest now. But in general, I love stories with large cast of characters, and I definitely want to write one someday. But they're very intimidating to me because, developing that many characters and giving them all page time is a lot. So my stories do tend to focus much smaller on like 1 or 2 characters, or like a very small core cast of characters. So I don't think I've had any projects that had like a very large cast of characters. That's interesting though. I'm scared of the character soup. That's why I've avoided large casts of characters. So I know I would do it. I've had scenes where like I had like 5 characters in a book that were all kind of relevant, 5 or 6, and they had to have a conversation all 6.
That's a lot.
And I was just like, this is a very intimidating scene. Like, what are all these characters doing at any given time? I ended up like mapping it out almost like a D&D kind of situation. Again, bring up the D&D. I've learned a lot of storytelling techniques from D&D. But
yeah, it's a balance between like reality, because in reality we interact with a lot of different people, and what you can actually manage on the page, and what readers can remember, what's important to a reader. Same thing, like when I start forgetting my own character names, you know, someone's got to go. RIP though, I still hold in my heart some of the characters I cut from Brightly Burning. I'm like, you had to go, but you were funny. I'm sorry.
All right. I think that is just about it for this topic. We've gone 20 minutes over our usual aim for a show, and we got about like 5 or 6 new topics to make shows on after talking about all this. So yeah, in 2 weeks, we will be on Alexa's channel. We have a topic already, don't we?
We do. Building an author platform, voted on Patreon. This was the first, this got the most votes, and then building an author platform got the second most. So
yeah, we were very close in ranking, so we figured that we'd do character creation this time, and then the runner-up for our next show on Alexa's channel in 2 weeks. And we should have a podcast episode coming soon as well. So yeah, again, in the description, there's links to all of our channels. There's links to our Patreon page if you would like to be a patron. Again, novelty live shows and the podcast will always be free to listen to and watch. But if you would like to support us and ask questions to maybe be featured as our patron of the week or anything like that, definitely check out our Patreon page and see if you'd like to join over there. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for this novelty show. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, maybe sooner, but with another episode. If we get the podcast up in time, but yeah, okay.
It's going to happen.
It will happen.
Goals.